All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Is my voice clear?
Yes, it's all right.
All right. So I'll start right now. My name is Radwan. I'm a medical intern at Faisal University. I'll give you the lecture of physiology of the bone, and because I know that your final is in a week, and this is just a very small topic in the final, then my job today is just to simplify the lecture and make you like get away with it with like the most important information that you need for the final, inshallah. So what I'll be doing, I'll be reading the slides, okay, because some people like know the concept, but they cannot read the difficulty of the slides. So I'll be reading the slides as well as at the end of the slide, I'll give you the gist of the topic, okay? So let's start with the lecture. All right, so this is just an introductory slide about the different important functions of the bone. So we know that it is the structural support for the body. We know that it assists in mineral regulation by controlling the calcium and phosphate levels. We know that the bones also are important for hematopoiesis, which is the production of our red blood cells, white blood cells, and others, basically the blood cells. We know that the bone is composed of an extracellular matrix and the bone cells, which are the osteocytes, and we'll talk about them in detail. And then after that, we know that the bone is basically a depot or a place to store the calcium and phosphate. And the bone is chronically remodeled. This is just an introductory slide. It's not very important. So this slide is from the middle of the lecture. I brought it here to the very beginning because it is very important to start with. Now, a very important concept to start with is that the bone is composed of two things, okay? Basically, first we have the deposition of the proteins or the organic materials, which we call the osteoid. And then after that, after we deposit these osteoid materials, okay, we calcify them or we add the minerals to them to make them hard. So I think about it as if that the bone is a jelly material, which is the osteoid or the organic material or the proteins, which is very like stretchy and not hard at all. And then we add to that jelly material, we add to it some minerals and some calciums and other salts that will make it very hard, like a rock. And that will give the final appearance of a bone. Okay, so that's basically the inorganic bone matter, which is basically the calcium and phosphate. And this is like also we know that the bone is like holds the majority of the calcium and the phosphate in the body, okay, in the form of the hydroxyapatite crystals. And then it deposits these calcium and phosphate over what we call the organic matrix, which is mainly type 1 collagen. Okay, now there are many other proteins that form the organic matrix, but just don't be fooled by the lots of names that are mentioned in this slide. Okay, like they are not as important as type 1 collagen. Okay, if you need to know them, then it's good for you. If not, then it's okay. Okay, because they are not that important as compared to type 1 collagen. So most important is the organic bone protein is the.
Can you make your voice a little bit clearer? It's not very clear.
Okay, just give me a second.
Take your time.
I'll try speaking through the mic directly. Maybe it is better. Okay, so we were saying, just a second. Okay, so we were saying that the organic bone material, most importantly, is type 1 collagen, which is the protein that we first make. And then after that, we make this protein so hard by adding the calcium and phosphate, which is the inorganic part of the bone. Just keep this concept in mind. So next is the structural part of the bone, and I believe that you've gone extensively through this, okay, in the histology lectures. So what I'll be doing is that I'll go through the first 5 or 6 slides, which talk about the histology of the bone a bit quickly, so that we can focus more on the important part later on, which is the regulation of bone physiology. So for this slide, it just tells you that any bone in general has a compact part from the outside, which is the very hard part. And then it has a trabecular part from inside, okay, which is the spongy part. And the importance of the spongy part is that it keeps the bone a bit lighter so that we can move easily, because if all our bones was compact bone, then it would be very heavy and it will be very difficult for us to move. That's why we need the trabecular bone inside. And also it's the place where the, inside the trabecular bones, inside the bone marrow is the place where the hematopoietic cells are made, which are the blood cells, okay? So what is the importance of the trabecular bone clinically? In some diseases where the trabecular bone becomes so thin and becomes so minimal, okay, we can have some fractures in the bones, and these mainly occur in the vertebra, okay, in the spinal column, and also in the hip. And this mainly occurs in osteoporosis, which we'll talk about in the very last slide of the lecture. Please, if I'm speaking so fast, or if you need me to repeat anything, I'll be more than happy to do so. You can stop me at any time, by the way. So the bone remodeling process is just a bird view slide. Okay, so it tells you everything in general. And we know already, okay, I think it's very clear that the bones are first remodeled by destroying the part that we need to build again. So the bone is not a constant process, okay? We need to keep remodeling it every single day so that we maintain a healthy bone, okay? If it was just like the same way that we synthesized from the very beginning, it's gonna be degenerated. That's why we need to destroy it every day, destroy some small parts and then rebuild them again, and then destroy some new parts and then rebuild them again. So the process starts with destruction of the damaged or the fatigued bone, okay, and this will release the calcium and the phosphate in the blood. Okay, and then after that, we build the new material. First, we build the jelly material that we talked about, the osteoid. We build it first in that empty area that we have destroyed. And then after we build that osteoid, we deposit all this jelly material. We bring the calcium and the phosphate from the blood and we put them over the jelly, okay, so that it will become very, very hard like a rock. So all of this process happens by a collection of cells that we call the basic multicellular unit. And in this process, around 500 milligram of calcium, around half a gram. So it's literally minimal, but this process happens every single day. Okay, so about half a gram of calcium is being removed from the bones, and then a new half of a gram of calcium we added again to the bone. So like we remove the old 500 milligram, and then we add a new 500 milligram, and this process keeps going on and on every single day. And of course, this process is regulated by many hormonal levels, and any imbalance between the destructions and the building will cause us trouble for the bones. So for the osteoclast, these are the first type of cells that start the process, which are the bone destructor cells. And they are these large cells with multiple nuclei inside of them. So they are known as the bone breaker cells, okay? They are multinucleated giant cells, so they contain many nuclei, as I just said. And they are derived from the monocytes, okay? So sometimes they like to bring this question, maybe not in MSK, maybe in the hematology block, but sometimes they like you to know that the osteoclasts are made from the monocytes, not from the mesenchymal cells or the bone cells like the osteoblast. We'll talk about that in the next slide. The osteoclast surface facing the bone has a ruffled borders, which means that the osteoclasts send like kind of projection to the bone so that it destroys the bone through these projections, okay? And then how does it do that? So first we need to destroy the mineral part, which is the inorganic part, which is the calcium and phosphate, and then we need to destroy the protein part. So if you want to break down, let's say, a bench in the kitchen, how would you do that? It's made from calciums and minerals. So you basically can pour on some bleach or some acid, and it will start eating up the bench by itself. And that's the same process that the osteoclasts do. They bring hydrogen, which is an acid, by hydrogen ATPase enzyme. They put it in this, on the area that they want to destroy. And by that, they degrade all the bony material. Okay, they degrade all the minerals from the bone and they release the calcium and phosphate in the blood. And then after they are done from this mineral, they degrade the proteins in itself, which is the osteoid or the jelly material, by the proteolytic enzymes, which we call the cathepsin K enzyme. This enzyme is responsible for degrading the protein part of the bone. And by that, we've completed the process of destruction. So we destroy the mineral first, and then we destroy the protein part. Okay. Of course, this process of osteoclast is controlled by many hormones. Most important is the parathyroid hormones, and there are around 4 slides about this specific hormone. So we will talk about that later. Here he's just mentioning, Dr. Rasool is just mentioning an example of the J disease. This is a disease that usually affects the older adults, okay, so people in the age 60s and 70s. It's basically where these cells, okay, becomes like unoppositionally activated. They becomes activated a lot and they start destroying lots of the bone. And then because of that, the osteoblast, which are the building cells, will come and they will try to deposit the bone as much as they can without caring about the organizational structure of the bone. So not in lamella, the way that we know. Okay, and that will end up giving us very weak bones, okay, with disorganized structure. you don't need to know Paget disease of the bones, most likely for your final, because it's too advanced. But I just explained it for you. So the summary of this slide is that the osteoclasts are the bone breaker cells. They are multinucleated giant cells. They release hydrogen to break down the minerals, and then they release the cathepsin K enzyme to break down the proteins of the bone. That's the summary of the slide. Next is the osteoblast. So after we've destroyed, let's say, this part of the bone, okay, now we want to build it again, right? Because we need to renew the bone. So we do that by the process, by the osteoblast cells, which are the bone builders, and they are derived from the bone marrow mesenchymal cells. So remember, the osteoclasts were derived from the monocyte, which is a blood cell, okay, while the osteoblast is derived from the mesenchyme. So basically, a group of osteoblasts will line the area. Okay, and they will start synthesizing first the jelly material that we've talked about always, which is the protein or the type 1 collagen. Again, don't be fooled by the lots of names that are mentioned here. Okay, it's just to make your life harder. You can just read through them, but you don't need to memorize them actually, because there are a lot. Okay, most important is type 1 collagen, and then you can just go through osteocalcin, osteonectin, and bone morphogenic proteins. After we deposit this jelly material, now we need to make it harder. We need to make it like a rock, like a bone. So we need to mineralize it with calcium and phosphate. Unfortunately, we have enzymes that will help us do this process. So we have enzymes that will recruit the calcium and the phosphate from the blood and bring them to the bone and then attach them to the bone. Okay, attach them to the new osteoid. These enzymes are mainly alkaline phosphatase, as well as, this is the major one, okay, that you probably need to know. And then as well as some smaller enzymes like the dentin matrix proteins and the sialoproteins. Okay, so they act as a nucleator for mineralization, which means that they just bring the calcium and phosphate and deposit them over the new osteoid or the new jelly material. Okay, the osteocalcin and the osteonectin are calcium and phosphate binding proteins. So these are the places where the new coming calcium and phosphate will attach on the new bone. Okay, so to summarize this slide, the osteoid will be, which is the protein material, will be deposited by the osteoblast. And then after it's being deposited, we have some enzymes like alkaline phosphatase. This enzyme will bring calcium and phosphate from the blood and will deposit them over the new bone. So this is alkaline phosphatase. It says that it promotes the mineralization by cleaving pyrophosphate. What is pyrophosphate? It's basically two phosphates that are attached to each other. It cuts through them, and by doing so, this process needs calcium and phosphate from the blood. So by cutting through a pyrophosphate, okay, this process uses calcium and phosphate from the blood, and this new calcium and phosphate, we deposit them over the osteoid in a form of crystals that we call the hydroxyapatite, which is the major type of crystals that is found in the bone. Okay, and of course, this process is laid down as in the picture in form of layers, and we call this layers lamella. Do we have any questions so far? Or we'll keep the questions for 2 more slides later. So this is everything about this slide. Next, we will talk about the osteocytes. These are basically the osteoblasts that were building the bone, but now they have become trapped in the material that we're building. Once they become trapped, they become kind of inactive cells. They just maintain the bony structure. Okay, so basically the osteocytes, these are the bone maintainers. They just maintain the bone structures. Okay, they are basically osteoblasts that are trapped in the bone matrix, as you can see here. Okay, and they are, of course, they are not each one by itself. They are connected to each others by what we call the canaliculi. These are small tunnels through which the osteocyte sends projections, and then these projections connect each cell to each others, okay? And they communicate through gap junctions. Now, osteocytes transmit the load-bearing signals to the pre-osteoblast, which differentiate and secrete osteoid. And from this sentence, one of your TBL questions, I believe, was derived. And this is the question where only 8% of the batch answered correctly. And I don't blame anyone who got it wrong, to be honest, because it is a so high-level question. It basically says that the osteocytes are the cells, they are the mechanoreceptor cells. They are the cells that senses signals from the outside environment to tell the bone when to start building itself. So in the question was asking which cell was responsible for triggering an increase in the bone mass. Cells that senses the environment. If someone, for example, started suddenly going to the gym and started lifting weights or doing a lot of exercises, then these osteocytes have mechanoreceptors. They will sense this increase in the pressure on the bones, and then they will activate the osteoblast to initiate more building of the bones or more remodeling. Because now, because of the high pressure, the high gym lifting or whatever, now we need more bone remodeling to maintain the health of the bone. And that's what we mean by when we say that the osteocytes are the mechanoreceptors and they are the main sensors of the bone. Okay, contrast this, okay, on the completely opposite direction. If someone was sitting, let's say, in a bed in a hospital for 1 month, then the osteocytes will not sense any pressure on the bone, and then the bone will not remodel itself. The remodeling process will be so weak because there are no sensors, there are no osteocytes that are sensing increase in pressure. So the remodeling will be so weak, okay, that the bone will, like, one day after the another, will start degenerating. And that's very common. Like, this bone degeneration is very common in people who are chronically hospitalized for very long periods of time. So that's what we mean by that they are mechanoreceptors, okay? Now these cells not only sense the changes in the pressure around them, but they also senses pressures in the hormones that regulate the bone remodeling process. So basically, they sense a change in whatever kind of signals, whether it is a pressure signal, a hormone signal, anything that will tell the bone to start or increase your remodeling, then these cells will become activated first, and then they'll send the signals to the osteoblast to start building the cell. Now, the osteoprogenitor cells, they are not that important, okay? They are the cells that line the inner structure of the bone. So like the trabeculae, you saw how the trabecules were kind of like a meshwork. Now, the trabeculae are lined by the endosteal cells or the osteoprogenitor cells, okay? And they are, of course, connected to other types of cells, like we said, the osteocytes and the periosteal cells and whatever other types of cells. These cells are not really important. They have two main functions. They remove the fragmented or the damaged parts of the bones that the osteoclast has destroyed. Okay, and then they are also important in the initiation of bone formation. So we said that the osteocytes are important in that process, and now we're saying also that the osteoprogenitor or the endosteal cells are also important in the building process of the new bones. So do we have any questions before we move on to the more important part? This is just a recap of physiology. I'll wait for a few seconds and then I'll take silence as a no.
No questions.
All right, perfect. So now we will move on to the important actual physiology part, and we'll spend some time in this because there are two main concepts to understand from this lecture. First one is the osteoclastogenesis, and then the second one is the calcium and parathyroid hormone levels in the blood. So I'll explain on the graph before reading this. This is basically how does the bone start the process of destruction? Okay, now after we've sensed that there is an increase in the pressure and the guy started going to the gym and we need to increase the bone remodeling. So how do we start this process on a physiological level? The osteoblast, okay, it all starts from the now the osteocytes first send the signal to the osteoblast, and then the osteoblast will start the entire process. The osteoblast okay, which are the building to a baby blood cell. Okay, so this is a cell that is in the blood. Okay, let me bring a pen here. So the osteoblast will send a signal. We call it the monocyte colony stimulating factor. It's just a protein that stimulates other cells. Okay, it will send a signal to this cell from the blood. It's a hematopoietic stem cell, because remember that we said that monocyte is the origin of osteoclast. And then this cell, once it receives the signal, it will become activated. It will become activated and it will change into what we call the osteoclast precursor. Now, what is the difference between these two cells? Literally, the only difference is that this new cells, when it became activated, it has this new receptor, which we call the rank L, which we call the rank, which is very important. Okay, this is what we call the osteoclast precursor cell. Now, this rank is a receptor on the cell. Okay, that it's an empty receptor. It's ready to receive any signal, and it's like a lock and key model. Okay, so this is the key, this is the lock. And once the key binds to it, the cell will become activated into the multinucleated giant cell that we know that will destroy the bone. Now, from where will the key or the signal come? It will come again from the osteoblasts. So the osteoblasts are the main controller here. Okay, so they will, once we need to destroy the bone, they will express this key signal, which is the what we call the rank L. Okay, and once the process of binding happens, then this osteoclast precursor will become the huge multinucleated giant cell that will destroy the bone. Okay, now let's assume that this process has happened and we've started destroying the bones. So again, the osteoblast sent a monocyte colony stimulating factor to a cell from the blood, and then this cell started growing and it expressed that protein on its surface, and it became called the osteoclast precursor because of the rank protein. And then the rank protein is bound to the rank L, and then this cell is transferred to the osteoclast cell that we know that can destroy the bone. Okay, so this rank L from the osteoblast is very important, and we will talk about different proteins in the blood, different hormones in the body that can increase the level of this rank L. And basically, by doing so, they are basically increasing the osteoclast number and they're increasing the bone destruction. The most important hormone of these is the parathyroid hormone. Okay, now why do we need to destroy our bones more? Why do we need to increase the rank L to increase the osteoclast? Why do we need to do this process on a higher level sometimes? Because when we destroy the bones, we release calcium in the blood, right? And this calcium is very important, okay, because people who develop hypocalcemia or low calcium level in the blood, if it reaches a very critical level, people can die in seconds because of the obstruction of the airways because of low calcium level. And that's why sometimes parathyroid hormone is released immediately. It causes an increase in the rank L, and then this causes an increase in the osteoclast, and it causes an increase in the bone destruction. Now, let's say that now the calcium level became again normal in the blood, everything became back to normal, and we need to stop the process of destruction. But we have many rank L that are available and that are ready to activate more osteoclast. So what do we do for this? The osteoblast will secrete a counter signal, okay, an opposite signal, which is basically the OPG, the osteoprotegrin. This is also very important. This osteoprotegrin is like it blocks this key, it blocks the rank L, so that the rank L will not be able to bind to the rank and activate more osteoclast. So this osteoprotegrin, we call it a decoy receptor, which means that it will block the rank L receptors. Now, so OPGs are basically opposite to rank L. If rank L causes an increase in the bone destruction and an increase in the number of osteoclasts, the OPG will cause a decrease in the number of osteoclasts and a decrease in the bone destruction process. Is that very clear? Let's read through this very quickly. So the osteoblast, okay, it starts the process of differentiation of the osteoclast. Basically, they release the monocyte colony stimulating factor, this monocyte, which transforms this cell into the osteoclast precursor, okay? And then these osteoblasts will display on their surface the rank ligand or the rank L, this protein that we've talked about, okay? They will display it on their cell surface. And when this protein binds to the rank that is found on the osteoclast precursor, when this binding happens, the pro-osteoclast will become the osteoclast that we know that will destroy the bone. Okay, this is not very important. Rank L is produced by the osteoblast, basically it's saying. And then after that, the osteoclast, once it's activated, many cells will fuse together to give us this huge cell that we've talked about. Here is a very important concept in these two lines. Basically, it's saying that when you have low OPG and low OPG to rank L ratio, which means that you have high rank L and low OPG, it means that you are destroying the bones more, because rank L will cause more osteoblast activation and more bone destruction. While on the opposite side, if you have lots of OPG, if you have a high OPG and a low rank L, then it means that you are preserving the bone, you are keeping it, you don't want to destroy it. And there are many hormones that control the level of these two things that we will talk about now. So this is a repetition of what we have just been explaining on the figure exactly. It says that the expression of rank L causes bone resorption. This rank L is the protein that causes bone resorption. And osteoblast produces the OPG as well on the opposite side. So it either produces the rank L or produces the OPG. One destroys the bone and one keeps the bone. Okay, so the osteoprotein is the decoy receptor for rank L, and decoy receptor means that it will just block the rank L so that it will become not activated. Okay, the OPG inhibits osteoclastogenesis and bone resorption. It stops the bone destruction process. Okay, and that's why we need a balance usually between the rank L and the OPG, because one of them destroys the bone and one of them builds the bone. So we need a balance between them, and this balance is maintained by the osteoblast. Okay. Here it's just saying that the OPG is secreted by many organs. Now, these are the hormones that control the level of OPG and rank L. Okay, most important of which is the parathyroid hormone and the estrogen. So the parathyroid hormone, okay, we said that this hormone is responsible for maintaining the calcium level in the blood. Whenever there is low calcium level in the blood, it activates the rank L so that it destroys the bone and it releases more calcium into the blood. That's the main function of this hormone. That's why PTH or parathyroid hormone increases the rank L level and decreases the OPG, because we want to destroy the bone to release more calcium in the blood. On the opposite side, estrogen is the bone building hormone. It's one of the hormones that builds the bone. It's a bone friendly hormone. Okay, so estrogen increases the production of OPG. Okay, because when you increase the OPG, you will block all those rank L receptors and you will keep and maintain the structure of the bones. So that's why in women, they usually maintain very good bony health because of the high estrogen level until they reach around the age of 50 to 55, which is the time of menopause. And at that time, estrogen will drop a lot because they have they stop their menses, and that's why estrogen drops a lot. And this is when they start to develop very weak bones, the disease that we call osteoporosis. So estrogen is a very bone friendly hormone that keeps the structure of the bones. The others are not that important. I'm just going to mention very quickly. TGF beta is a protein that heals everything. So whenever you have a wound, for example, on the skin, TGF beta will come and close the wound. So in a similar manner, you can think about it that it will prefer that the bones are in a good health and they are repaired and everything is okay. So basically, it's against the process of bone destruction. It increases the production of OPG. Okay, so we have TGF beta and estrogen. Okay, this usually loves forming the bones, while on the opposite side, parathyroid hormone, vitamin D, and glucocorticoids, all of them will favor the destructions of the bone. Okay, so parathyroid hormone, we just talked about it. Vitamin D, there is a slide about it. And then glucocorticoids, you might have heard your relatives saying that they don't want to take this medication, which is the steroids, basically, because it causes weak bones. And that's what we're talking about. Again, steroids can increase the rank L and decreases the OPG, causing an increase in the bone destructions. This is, again, a summary of everything that we've talked about. So once we have activated this osteoclast through the entire process that we talked about, the osteoclast will come to this board. If, let's say, it wants to destroy this process, it will come and cover this area. It will send its projections, which what we call the ruffled bone, the acid, and the acid will eat up the entire bone, the entire mineral part of the bone, sorry. Okay. So the hydrogen will remove all the calcium and phosphate, and then basically the cathepsin K enzyme will eat up the protein part of the bone. Okay, and then this area entirely will be destroyed. So I think this slide is very clear. We have been talking about this for the entire past 15 minutes. This is a summary again of everything that we talked about. The bone remodeling process start with osteoclast. They cover an area like that, as we talked about. And then this area, it will become destroyed by the hydrogen and then by the enzyme, the cathepsin K enzyme. And then once it's destroyed, the osteoblast will deposit the new osteoid, and then the new osteoid will become mineralized by calcium and phosphate. And that's how the bone remodeling process is completed. So any questions before we move on to this last topic of the lecture? Okay, I believe there is no question. If you have any, you can keep it till the end. So now we're done from how the bones remodel itself, okay, and how it destroys and builds itself and everything that we've talked about. Now we will talk about the other aspect of bone physiology, which is basically the calcium and phosphate levels, which is a bit tricky, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible. So these are some basic informations about calcium. You don't really need to memorize any of these numbers. It's the main thing about this slide is just it's telling you that calcium is mainly found in the bones. Only 2%, only 1% is found in the blood and in the body fluids. And this 1% is very important to maintain. We don't want it to increase and we don't want it to decrease. We need to maintain it as it is. And that's why bone regulation is very important, okay? So calcium concentration normally is between 2.1 and 2.6, and we need to keep that level always. And here, it's not that important for you now. It's saying just that calcium, 60% of it can be filtered by the kidney and can be thrown in the urine, or we can reabsorb it, and 40% is bound to proteins. And whenever a thing is bound to proteins, it means that it cannot be filtered by the kidney, okay? So we cannot lose it in the urine unless we have some diseases with it. You can just skip it. So for calcium homeostasis, you need to understand that our intake of calcium through eggs and cheese and other sources of calcium, the intake, which is around 20, is equal to the excretion, which is 18 in the feces and 2 in the urine. So it's always that the intake is equal to the output, because again, we need to maintain that amount of constant calcium in the blood. We don't want anything to happen to it, okay? So calcium metabolism is very tightly regulated, okay? The intake is equal to the excretions. The dietary intake, these are the sources of calcium. It's excreted in the feces and in the urine. However, sometimes when we have calcium deficiency due to any cause, the intestine has the ability to absorb 90% of the calcium that we eat. Basically, you eat the calcium, it gets absorbed through the intestines. That's the first source of calcium in the body. And then the second source is basically the bones, which contain 99% of the body calcium. So it takes the new calcium from the GI tract and it throws away the old calcium. And also the kidneys are very important regulators because they also can throw away the calcium in the urine. So these slides are very important, and they are the difficult part of this lecture. So before we start them, I need to you to think about thyroid hormone is the main hormone that regulates the calcium level in the blood. Whenever there's a drop in calcium level in the blood, parathyroid hormone will shoot up. Okay, that's number one. That's a concept that you need to keep it in your mind. Okay, whenever calcium levels drop in the blood, the parathyroid hormone goes up. That's number one. Number two, vitamin D is also very important for calcium absorption. Whenever vitamin D increases, it causes an increase in two things, in calcium and in phosphate, okay? Parathyroid hormone causes an increase only in calcium, while vitamin D causes an increase in calcium and phosphate. Now, with these two concepts in mind, we can read this figure. So basically, when we have a drop in the calcium level in the blood, parathyroid hormone will immediately shoot up, because that's the most important thing to regulate, one of the most important things to regulate in our body, which is the calcium level. So parathyroid hormone will shoot up. It will always lead to three things. Two of them are direct and one of them is indirect. So the direct thing that the parathyroid hormone will do, it will basically do anything that will raise the calcium level. So it will go to the bone and will increase the bone destruction through the all mechanism that we've been talking about. It will increases the rank L, will increases the osteoclast, and will increases the bone destruction. And this destruction will cause the release of calcium in the blood. So it will increase the calcium level in the blood slightly. That's number one mechanism of parathyroid hormone. Number two, it goes onto the kidney, okay, which is this one. I'm talking about this one. So it goes to the kidney, the parathyroid hormone, and it causes an increase in the calcium reabsorption from the urine. So it does not allow the calcium to spill into the urine. It absorbs everything back to the blood, okay? But at the same time, parathyroid hormone, because it takes the calcium, it will throw away something instead of it, which is the phosphate, okay? That's why it leads to a low phosphate level. So that's the second mechanism of increasing calcium levels in the blood. The third mechanism is that parathyroid hormone will activate vitamin D. Now, what do I mean by activate vitamin D? We usually store vitamin D in our body in inactive form. We call it the cholecalciferol, or the vitamin D3 form. This form is inactive. It doesn't work. In order to activate it, okay, we need to bring an OH group to it, okay, 2 OH groups, and that's why it becomes called 125 dihydroxycholcalciferol, a very long name. It basically means that this vitamin D3, we attach 2 OH group to it at the 1 position and at the 25 position. Okay, this form of vitamin D is the active form that, according to the concept that I just said at the beginning of this slide, I said that whenever vitamin D increases, it causes an increase in 2 things, in calcium and in phosphate. So vitamin D will go to the GI tract and it will absorb every calcium and phosphate that you guys are eating through your diet, okay? And that's the third mechanism by which the parathyroid hormone causes an increase in the calcium level in the blood. So again, I'll repeat the 3 mechanisms. It goes to the bones and it increases calcium absorption from the bone, okay? It goes to the kidneys and it increases calcium absorption from the kidneys, and it activates vitamin D, and vitamin D can go to the GI tract and can absorb all the calcium and phosphate. So parathyroid hormone does not act directly on the GI tract, it acts indirectly through vitamin D. Okay, now that's the first scenario that we have, which is if we have low calcium in the blood. I hope it's clear for you. The second scenario, what if we have low phosphate in the blood? Now, this is less important than this. The scenario of low calcium level is much more important. But let's assume that we have a low phosphate. What raises the serum phosphate? Of course, it's not parathyroid hormone, because we said that parathyroid hormone raises the calcium, but it lowers the phosphate because it's throw all the phosphate in the urine. So it's not the parathyroid hormone. So if we have low serum phosphate levels, the vitamin D is what increases the phosphate in the blood. So if we have low phosphate levels, vitamin D will increase. Vitamin D, as we said, it will causes an increase in the absorption of calcium and phosphate from the blood. So we will have a rise in the calcium and we will have a rise in the phosphate. Okay, also vitamin D, it can increases the bone destruction through the rank L mechanism again, and it increases the calcium and phosphate. Now, when we have high serum calcium, so it's opposite to this. If we have high serum calcium, parathyroid hormone will go down. We said that parathyroid hormone goes up if we have low calcium, but if we have high calcium, then the parathyroid hormone will go down. And guess what? When the parathyroid hormone goes down, then everything that we talked about here in the kidney will be reversed, right? Because now the hormone is not functioning. So basically, the calcium will be thrown away in the urine, okay, while the phosphate will be reabsorbed, again, raising the serum phosphate level, so that we've corrected the first problem from the very beginning, okay? Very quick recap I'm going to do for this slide, because we're done from the lecture, by the way. It's almost the last slide. So if we have low calcium level, immediately the parathyroid hormone will shoot up. It will cause us 3 things. Number 1, it will cause us bone destruction, and that will release calcium in the blood, which is good for us. Number 2, it will goes on to the kidney and it will absorb all the calcium from the urine. Again, it will not allow any calcium to be thrown in the urine, and that's good for us. It will raise the serum calcium. Number 3, it activates the vitamin D, and vitamin D will increases the absorption of calcium and phosphate. What is the summary of this figure? The summary is that when parathyroid hormone is released, the calcium level will goes up, okay, and the phosphate level will go down. That's the summary. Although we are increasing phosphate absorption from the GI tract through vitamin D, but we are throwing away more phosphate through the kidneys. So the net effect, the final effect, is that calcium will increase and phosphate level will decrease when we have an elevation in parathyroid hormone. On the opposite hand, if the phosphate level is low, vitamin D will increase. Vitamin D will causes calcium and phosphate to be absorbed from the GI tract and from the bones. This will raise the serum calcium and phosphate, which lower the parathyroid hormone. Okay, when we lower the parathyroid hormone, we will have opposite to these 2 mechanisms. So the phosphate reabsorption will increase from the kidney, which will raise the serum phosphate, but at the same time, the calcium reabsorption will decrease, and we will throw away more calcium in the urine. I know I'm speaking a lot. I know this lecture is very difficult, but that's the only way to be done. This is the third scenario. It's again not as important as the first one, but it's kind of like the second one in terms of importance. What if we have low vitamin D in the blood? And now if you know what vitamin D do, then it should be very easy. We know that vitamin D absorbs calcium and phosphate. So if we have low vitamin D, then we have low calcium and low phosphate, right? So if we have low vitamin D or low active form of vitamin D, we will have low absorption of calcium and phosphate from the GI tract. Okay, and thus we will have low calcium and phosphate in the blood. When we have low calcium, what's the main thing that triggers that is triggered in your mind? We will release the parathyroid hormone, right? Whenever we have low calcium, we release the parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone will cause an increase in the bone destruction, okay, in order to increase the level of calcium and phosphate. Again, the kidney, parathyroid hormone will cause an increase in the calcium, okay, calcium absorption from the kidney, while it will throw away the phosphate. What is the net result of all of this? The net result is that we're trying to maintain the calcium level, but because of the low vitamin D, we are usually not able to do so. Okay, even if we're destroying the bones, we're usually causing more damage to the bones than we are actually benefiting from the calcium that is released from the bone. Okay, so basically we'll have low phosphate levels because of two things: because of the kidney is throwing away the phosphate, and also because there is low GI absorption. So we'll have low phosphate levels. We will have low calcium levels, okay, because we don't have much absorption from the GI tract, and we are destroying the bones, so we are having poor mineralization. So that's the effect when you have low vitamin D. Okay, so that's very bad. When you have low vitamin D, you basically have low calcium and low phosphate. The bone, you're trying to resorb it to increase the calcium and phosphate, but there is no benefit. You're basically just causing more damage to the bone. This is the final slide, which is basically the disease that we call osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is, I mentioned it in the very beginning. It happens when the estrogen level drops significantly. That's the most common reason for osteoporosis. So it happens in postmenopausal women, in older women, when the estrogen drops significantly. We said that estrogen is a bone lovely protein. It's a hormone. It's a hormone that loves the bones, and it keeps maintaining it by increasing the OPG level. Okay, and the OPG like maintains bone formation and so on. So if we have low OPG and we have low estrogen level, then the bone will start destroying itself more and more. There will be no building up of bones. Okay, so it will start destroying itself, as you can see in the picture, and then that will decrease the mass of the bones. Okay, and when you decrease the mass of the bones, basically you will easily fracture your bones, and that mainly happens either in the hip, okay, in the hip, in the neck of the femur. That's number one. And number two, it happens in the vertebra. These two sites, if you have a fracture in them, then it's very classical for osteoporosis. You think about that osteoporotic process are going on. Let's solve this question, which is, I think, the last slide, yeah. So this question, it's telling you that there's an 18-month-old son. Okay, he is having problem with delayed dentation, short stature, and difficulty and painful walking and bowing of the legs. All of these are problems that are related to bone formation, right? History reveals a natural birth without any complication, and the mother attended all clinical appointments. He has been breastfed since birth. Now, why this is in red? Because usually you cannot keep breastfeeding the child till 18 months of age without supplying him with vitamin D. So this tells you that the child is very deficient in vitamin D. Okay, because the mother's milk is usually low in vitamin D. So if the child needs to continue on breast milk on breastfeeding, then we need to supply him usually with vitamin D. So the child is basically demonstrating this scenario. He has low level of vitamin D, so basically he will have poor bone mineralization, and he will have low phosphate and low calcium in the blood. So it's telling you where is the problem. Very easily, the problem is with mineralization of the bones. You have low calcium, you have low phosphate, you are destroying the bones to get more calcium and phosphate of them, and you have poor mineralization. And this is the disease that we call rickets, basically. It happens in young children, very young children, like this guy, 18 months old. And thank you very much. I can answer any questions. I'm sure that I was speaking so fast, but the lecture is so tough. There's nothing, it's so tough and it's so condensed. Okay, the slides are so condensed, so there's literally nothing that I could do more than that. So if you have any questions, I'll be ready to answer. And thank you so much for your listening.